The Economic Development and Small Business Subcommittee on Housing will come to order. Will the clerk please take attendance?
Chair Coleman.
Here.
Representatives Devendorf, Stone. Here. Scott. Andrews.
Here.
Grant. Here. Cerniglu. Here. Aragona.
Here.
Zorn. Fink.
Here.
DeBoyer.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you do have the floor.
Thank you. Rep. Cerniglu moves to adopt the minutes from the meeting on May 18th. Thank you. The meeting minutes from May 18th are adopted. Today we will be hearing testimony on Rep. Andrews' bill, House Bill 4891. Rep. Andrews.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to start off by providing a little bit of background just for awareness. This is not a subject matter that I'm unfamiliar with. My family has owned rental properties, residential and commercial, for most of my life, a business that I, from time to time, participated in and helped, with the management of. And during my practice as a lawyer, a significant part of that was focused on contracts and property law. And so I'm no stranger to rental agreements and in the industry, which I just wanted to clarify because I think at times there's a feeling that maybe we legislate on things we don't know a lot about. What I'm attempting to do here is address what I believe to be a recent problem that is sort of a byproduct of the housing crisis and the housing shortage that we have. There is sort of a recent occurrence of certain landlords, what I would describe as bad actors in the space, charging exorbitant fees for applications, and then as those application fees are denied, essentially creating extra profit for themselves off of the denial of those fees. There are, of course, reasonable fees for applications, things like background checks and credit reports, which our bill makes an allowance for. What we are concerned about is the trend of application fees rising into the hundreds of dollars range. And when you have individuals, often minorities who are trying to find housing, filling out 5 or more applications at a time, your first month's rent can quickly be consumed in application fees before you even get a chance to have your application accepted. This approach to limiting these fees is not novel. There are several states that in recent years have enacted similar, though differing in some cases, types of restrictions. Just to go through a few of those, in Maine, landlords can only charge fees for the actual cost of the screening. In Massachusetts, application fees are strictly prohibited. In Minnesota, any extra money beyond what is needed for the screening should be refunded, which is the approach we took here. In New York, they limit it to $20. In Vermont, application fees are prohibited. In Washington, the application fee must be equal to the screening cost exactly. And in Wisconsin, there's a $20 limit. All that to say, there have been many different approaches to the issue. So we're learning from what other states have already successfully accomplished. And again, the goal here is to make sure that people who are looking for affordable housing or housing in general are not being taken advantage of during the screening process. To reiterate, I believe that the majority of landlords do not engage in this activity. I personally do not know any landlords that engage in the activity, but it is an activity that we know is happening. It's showing up in surveys, and it's particularly problematic in communities where rents are already the highest. So I believe that this will help us address this problem directly and limit bad actors in the space and provide a better avenue for people to find housing who desperately need it. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Rep. Andrews. Any questions from the members? Rep. Stone?
Thank you for your bill and thank you for your testimony. Can you explain why this is your approach versus capping the costs of the application or aligning it with the cost of background checks?
So our thought process was that the exact cost of a background check can vary and could increase or decrease over time. And so rather than try to set an exact statutory dollar amount that might, in 5 years not reflect reality, to just say that whatever the cost of the screening is an acceptable fee, and then beyond that, if the applicant isn't accepted, it has to be refunded. So we were just trying to create an allowance, recognizing that things could change, and while other states have set a $20 limit, $20 might not actually fully recognize the cost of a background check. So just trying to build in some flexibility.
Any other members? Rep. Fink? Oh. Rep. Fink, go ahead.
Yeah, so I have a few different questions here. Well, I guess the first would be, what do you think what's the purpose of the application fee?
Generally, to run a background check, credit check, to make sure that the applicant meets certain standards to be able to rent the unit, and that can vary broadly from landlord to landlord, but usually it's for a background check.
But you agree that people charge more than only the cost of running iChat and a credit history, right? Because that's the portion that you're saying they could keep even if they reject somebody under this bill, right?
Yeah, whatever the cost of the background check is.
Okay, so my question is, what do you think the purpose of the additional, why do they charge more than that now?
So honestly, a lot of the ones that are charging these really high costs are doing it because they can.
Yeah, my question is not about the really high ones. I mean, I have questions about that, but what I'm trying to understand is do you think there is no legitimate reason that a landlord, a good acting, you said the majority are good, so if the cost of iChat is $10 and it's $12 on a credit history and they want to charge $50, which is not, I don't think, in the exorbitant category you were talking about before, what is the remaining $28 for?
I guess it would vary by person. I imagine it could be administrative costs, depending on the size of the landlord's operation.
And so my question is, aren't those costs incurred whether isn't the purpose of the application to determine whether the person is a good fit or not, and those costs are incurred whether the answer is yes or no?
Well, I would say the administrative costs should just be factored into the rental cost, and not be borne by people who are being rejected from being able to be tenants.
But isn't the upshot of that tenants are paying the cost for applicants who are not qualified to be tenants? That's what you're saying, right?
In essence, but I think the actual practice here is that it reduces the number of rejected applications that are being screened, rather than just being more diligent about accepting the ones that meet the background check requirements. I would say that cost of rent already reflects most incurred costs from landlords to begin with. It's generally why the rent is set the way it is, right? Cost plus profit. So recognizing that background checks are absolutely the one thing that you're going to have to run whenever somebody applies, I personally feel that administrative costs shouldn't be borne by people who aren't ever going to get the chance to live there.
I guess I'm just saying, though, the applicants create the cost. The experience of the application creates that cost, not the other tenants continuing to live there. So in terms of where that cost should be allocated, I'm struggling a little bit with why your answer is the tenants that already have this landlord-tenant relationship should pay for new prospective tenants to find out if they're going to become tenants.
I think this is a pretty small cost borne across a whole tenancy if you're thinking about a large enough operation to need administration. But that extra $25, $30 across 5 or 6 applications is significant, especially for a low-income renter, where maybe that cost is $1 or $2 across a whole apartment complex or something, something to that effect. So I think you're talking about focused versus spread costs.
Minority Vice Chair Aragona.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for Rep. Andrews for taking a look at this issue and bringing forward a proposal here. I saw in the bill that there's a $1,000 fine that a prospective tenant that gets denied could go after the property owner for, correct? I know we've had a number of presentations within the committee regarding the shortage of housing. So a circumstance could happen, I think, that you have 1 unit and 5 applicants. Well, the landlord's going to need to deny 4 of those, correct?
Of course.
They could be keeping a portion of the application fee per the bill. However, do you think that's you're opening up litigious situations for those other 4 that get denied, saying, well, I think I should get all of this back, therefore I'm going to sue for $1,000?
Well, we tried to be clear that the amount that the landlord could keep is equal to the background check. So as long as the landlord can demonstrate, which is as easy as showing receipts, that they're not keeping money beyond the cost of the background check, you could have a pretty cut and dry dismissed case. And I mean, the $1,000 number, absolutely open to discussion on if that, there's a belief that that number could be different. But the idea behind setting a number was that we didn't want to set a fee that could essentially just be factored into the cost of doing business, which often happens with lower fines and fees. So we were trying to create an actual deterrent for the behavior that would be difficult to say, well, we'll just keep on doing this, and if we get sued once in a while, that's fine.
Okay, but I've worked with a number of lawyers throughout my career, and anytime I've ever asked them, can somebody sue over this, the answer is always the same.
Yeah, welcome to the United States.
Anybody can sue over anything, right?
Yeah.
So it seems like this might be just one more opportunity to bring a landlord to court.
Again, we tried to be specific about defining what the landlord could and couldn't keep, and I think you'd find that in a case like this, sure, there are going to be attorneys that try to work an angle here and profit off of this. Yeah, I mean, those attorneys are always going to exist in every industry and in every way, but it's very easy, I think, with the way that we've designed this for the landlord to come to court and say, this is how much the background check cost, this is how much we kept, the rest was refunded. And I think you'd be hard pressed to find a judge that wouldn't dismiss the case on the merits at that point.
Okay. One last question, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman. You had mentioned that you're in the industry. You know others in the industry.
Absolutely.
However, you don't know anybody actually that's one of the bad actors.
Correct.
And I believe you also stated that the number of bad actors is very small throughout the state.
I would suspect anyway. I mean, hard to exactly nail that down, but
Sure.
I suspect it is a small part of the industry.
Sure. So if only a small part of the industry is charging exorbitant fees, the rest are good actors not charging exorbitant fees, often refunding. Why are we coming up with a fix that is spread across all of them, and arguably is going to be a bit more onerous towards them? My colleague Representative Stone mentioned, what about if there was some type of cap? Would you be more open to redefining this fix to go after just those bad actors rather than to spread it out across all of the industry?
So the goal is, of course, to catch the bad actors basically to close loopholes, right? So you often have to blanket regulate in order to close loopholes that are being taken advantage of. I would categorize this as a loophole that's being taken advantage of. I don't think anybody imagined that rental fees should be a profit item, and the fact that it is a profit item is really only reflective of the fact that we have a housing shortage that requires people to apply to a limited supply of apartments multiple times over. In past decades, that this wouldn't have even been a viable means of profiting because the housing to applicant mix was more equal. So we're trying to kind of close up a recent exploitation. To your question about whether we'd be open to a cap instead, if the industry thinks that would be better, I'm absolutely open to it. Like I said, the reason we came up with the language we did is because we were trying to recognize that costs for background checks could and probably would change over time and not, require a legislative action to continually, kind of level set and figure out what the acceptable dollar amount is for a background check. But I'm absolutely open to that as a fix. I mean, again, the goal is to stop a small subset of bad actors. I firmly believe that the vast majority of landlords, my parents included, would never be impacted by this. I mean, they don't even charge application fees. I mean, just for what it's worth. But I think this would really not impact most people who are acting in good faith, are only charging what it costs to run the background checks to begin with. And I think it's important because the people who are most impacted by this are the ones who are the least advantaged, right? That, students, people in Black and brown communities, just low-income families in general who often have the hardest time finding housing, are often going to be putting in more applications, and who are going to run into this sort of practice most often. And these fees will eat up their ability to put down first and last month's rent, which is often a requirement to rent in the first place. So just trying to take that possible exploitation away.
Thank you. Hey, we'll move on to Rep. DeBoyer.
Thank you, Chair. Rep. Andrews, I appreciate that you've dug into this, and I do agree that that those sharks out there, those bad actors, they definitely cause a problem. So I think it's worthy of at least addressing. But a couple of concerns that I would just like to hear from you is, is there any possibility that this could create an unintended consequence, which is maybe applications not even being reviewed on their face because an entity would not have the time? And additionally, you've mentioned your parents and their rentals, so there is an expense associated with it, potentially an employee of an agency that is reviewing these applications. It's not just profit, right?
Yeah.
It's the expense of that individual that takes the time to do the processing. So the idea to me that we'll do a flat can't do it, I think kind of is a little bit, you're disregarding the actual operational cost. But to me, my more concern would be, do you think there's a possibility that we could create an unintended consequence, that some people's applications are just flat out, circular filed?
So if I could answer in reverse order, because it's easier probably that way. Again, like I said before, I think when it comes to administrative cost, that's the cost of doing business, and I think generally the rents should reflect that. And that's something we probably disagree over, but I think it's not great to have the cost of administration borne by applicants rather than residents. But we talked about with Representative Fink. Reasonable minds can probably disagree over that, and it's of course business. As to the unintended consequence, I actually think one of the problems right now is that you have applicants who would, on their face, be ineligible, still being charged these fees because, frankly, they can. And I think there's something to be said here for some of those actually just being rejected outright and not being run through the process because it could be a profit item. Could you end up having some people caught up in an unintended way in that? I suppose it's possible, but it would depend on why they're rejecting them. I mean, we have plenty of laws to protect, black applicants from being rejected on race or, creed, whatever. We have civil rights laws for a lot of those cases to begin with. So, it, of course, always open to making sure that we don't have unintended consequences like that. That would be bad. But I would say that I think it is a problem now that people who already wouldn't meet the requirements are just still being allowed to pay the fees because make money off of it.
And we'll circle back to Rep. Fink one more time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I could just follow up on that, tell me what scenario you're describing there where, how would a land, without the application, other than impermissible reasons, how would a landlord know not, what is that interaction like where a landlord shouldn't have taken the application because they know the person is going to be rejected without the application?
So again, I guess this is the difference between large and small operations. Most of my experience is with smaller operations, obviously, and I know on a large scale, you basically have to move through the application process in order to identify things. But I think for a lot of smaller landlords, you end up getting people reach out on a kind of an individual basis, and you get a chance to talk to them a little bit before making them go through the application process. So I think it just varies by operation, but I recognize what you're saying. On a larger scale, you really don't have the ability to do that.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, and I appreciate that's where your experience is. I do have experience with both large and small, and I'm actually thinking that you tend to see, you're more likely to see like a fair housing or other legal violation with a small landlord.
It tends to be true.
Even though they're probably not trying to be, because they are taking shortcuts like, well, listen, whatever, I don't think that this, I think your circumstance is not going to work out for my apartment. Why? Well, they may articulate it because of age or some other impermissible reason, and that we don't want them to default to that,
Some of it is, with the application, you could, even before running a background check, almost immediately on some cases know that the person isn't going to meet requirements. They have a pet or they don't meet income thresholds, stuff like that. And so I think there's some cases right there, like outright, you can just say, you know what, refund everything. This isn't going to make review. But I do recognize what you're saying. I mean, it often is smaller ones that have this issue, and we've seen some research that shows that often that like level of discrimination can impact the fee that somebody's being charged. I think subconsciously more often than not, but
Yeah, and I could see that being right. I mean, again, like the less formal methods of a
Yeah.
really small landlord, like they. I guess what I'm saying is like we certainly would not want one of the consequences of this to be that people are being less kind of holistic or less methodological in who they're taking and who they're not, because that will tend to lead towards impermissible results, right?
fully agree with that. Yes.
If I could just very quickly ask one more follow-up as soon as I think of it, which I think will be really fast, Mr. Chair. I lost it.
Okay, we're going to move on to Rep. Cerniglu.
Thank you. And this may have already been covered while I was trying to read through these sheets here, but is there any requirement for the landlord to approve or deny the application, or can they just accept the application and then just let it sit?
So the only thing we have in there regarding that is that if the applicant is accepted, then they don't have to refund the fees. But if they're rejected, that's when they have to refund anything beyond the cost of the background check. I think that's the only real consideration we gave to that.
But like in current law, like if I apply to an apartment complex, do they have to reject, or do they even have to review my application, or can they?
I guess I don't really know the answer to that question from a legal standpoint. I mean, I guess I'd have a hard time believing that any landlord is just like setting possible renters on the table and just kind of leaving them there. But I mean, I suppose that could happen.
I mean,
and that would
assuming
be
they're
bad.
full or they
Yeah.
have already rented out all their units, like,
So
can
that-
they just like pick and choose, like, I'm going to look at that one, not that one?
That is
and-
another activity that probably bears legislating on, is that there is also a recent, again, housing crisis related activity of renters still accepting or landlords still accepting applications even though they don't have any open units. That really wasn't something we were looking at with this, but it's another one of those kind of odd corner case off the wall things that we're seeing happen that is kind of taking advantage of people.
I was just curious because assuming they have an apartment that they want to rent and they need someone to rent it, then it's mutual benefit for
Right.
someone to submit an application. And the reason that they want an application is because they want to determine that person is going to be able to be a good tenant there. But that's also for their benefit. Yet they're charging that person for that. Just trying to make it all make sense in my own mind. So thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Rep. Andrews, and we appreciate your testimony today. Next up, we're going to have Erica Farley from the Rental Properties Association of Michigan, who wishes to speak and opposes the bill.
Thank you, Chair and committee members, for letting me testify on HB 4891 today. As the Chair mentioned, my name is Erica Farley, and I'm the Executive Director for the Rental Property Owners Association of Michigan. We are opposed to the bill as written. We have a few concerns regarding this. We represent majority of smaller property owners. These are single-family homes, and these are small property owners. A lot of time it is their rental income, their retirement income, and it is a secondary thing. But there are real costs that come with these application fees. When talking to our members and using that evidence, our fees for applications are usually anywhere between $40 and $60. And depending on how large the landlord is, sometimes there are labor costs. That's a real cost. These are real costs to our landlords. And one of the discussions that you had is who absorbs that cost potentially for the labor costs. Is that the current tenants? Is that a future tenant? But either way, is that an increase in rental costs? And no one here wants that, especially with our housing shortage. And that's obviously a major concern here going forward. So for us, for our members, this has nothing to do with profit. This is not a profit center for our property owners. And we are not seeing that going forward. We're not seeing that, at least in our section, in our membership. And I think two major things that is a concern is for us is one, is we're talking about housing legislation throughout both the House and the Senate. The bill cannot be taken in a vacuum. There are several bills out there, obviously, that deal with housing and making sure that as we talk about applications, we're also talking about other bills that have to deal with no background checks and no credit checks. And so as we talk about these bills, we really need to look at this as a whole as opposed to one individual bill and how those affect each other. So these are our concerns today, and we are happy to work with the sponsor moving forward on any amendments. And if you have any questions, please let me know.
Thank you. We have a question from Representative Grant.
I just have two quick questions as we're kind of talking about the parameters of this legislation. For your group that you represent, do you think there's any point in the process during an application where it could be determined, as Rep. Andrews is saying, that this may not be a good fit for factors that are within the law, and so therefore we don't need to proceed to a background check and other things. So to get to the point of what he's trying to do, take money from people that they don't have, they're going to need when they do find a place to go. Is there any point in the process?
I think that there would be a real concern of making a judgment call on a tenant on factors that are not exact. I think to ensure that a property owner is maintaining the law and maintaining that someone is not discriminated against, whatever that factor is, that has to be very exact. And having something that is an abstract of trying to decide if this person is qualified, I think that's a slippery slope, and that's a major concern that we would think going forward, because I think that could be a snowball rolling downhill.
Okay. In that case, do you agree with cap being put on application fees?
I think it's a discussion but what that looks like, and I think that's also going to depend on what part of the state we are talking about and what kind of properties that you're talking about. But I mean, it's definitely like a discussion, but I think that factors have to be taken in there.
I just wanted to clarify two main points that were in your position on them.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Any other questions from the members? Okay, Representative Fink.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. The question I was thinking of, Rep. Andrews actually kind of prompted me to remember what it is. So he used an example in his testimony. He and I can follow up about this. Obviously, we work together. But he used an example of a landlord taking applications knowing that there was no vacancy. Perhaps, I haven't thought about this exactly all the way through, but, perhaps like a really ridiculous amount of money could be sort of similarly, it at least sort of reminds one of the elements of a fraud. Something like a consumer protection model or something maybe could address something like that. Or just like a requirement, say, if you don't have units available, maybe you have a very desirable apartment complex, people still want to have an application in so that they can be on your waiting list. But that conversation would have to be up front. The landlord, would have to, before accepting the application fee, would have to say, we'll take this, we'll process you. There's no units now, but you can get on a wait list or something. I mean, that kind of, in other words, if we only are trying to target bad actors, is there a way, you think there's a way to like look at the admitted disparity that tends to exist in resources between applicants and landlords and whatever, and come up with a way for the landlord to sort of help the applicant, make a smart decision about that by being upfront about something like not having a unit at the time?
Yes, I think that we are open to discussion, and I think the more information that we can get to prospective tenants and helping educate people through the process, having gone through the process myself, especially when I was a young person, I had no idea what I was doing. So I needed the more information that I got, and at that time it was it was trial and error, or I called my parents, right? But not everybody has that option to call their parent to ask. So the more education, the more information, I think is better. And I think one thing that you really hit on is making sure that we're going to fully admit that there are bad actors in the industry, just like there is in any industry. But making sure that we are not taking a broad brush to either make it more difficult those who are already in the industry, or trying to make sure that more people do not come into the industry to provide housing, because we do know that there is a housing shortage in the state of Michigan. MSHA says 190,000. Some people believe it's even higher than that. So as we work through this legislation, in total, housing policy in general, we want to make sure that we are not icing out those who want to get into the industry, to make sure that that housing is provided, but making sure that we are micro-targeting, using a scalpel, not a hatchet, et cetera, to make sure that certain things are addressed that we understand, but not make this more difficult for both the property owner and for the resident. I hope that answers your question, Representative.
Representative Cerniglu.
Thank you. So, in looking at an application for tenancy, I assume that includes the background check. Maybe people put down previous residences, employment. I actually don't know exactly what goes on it. And so the background check that gets sourced out, I would assume, like to an agency, which probably is a very quick procedure. So, like, assuming you're checking references or like past, places that were lived, I don't know, like if I were checking, someone's application for their job or something. I mean, that at a maximum, I think would maybe take me like an hour or something. How long does it take to like process, an application?
I think I would have to find out. I'm sure it depends on individual cases. Are we talking about it's someone who has an employee who is doing it? Are we talking about a individual landlord who is going and submitting for the criminal background check and then the credit check and then is calling for income verification? That's really going to depend on the situation and who the property owner is. So I don't know if there's like a specific answer to that. It's just going to really depend on that situation.
Okay, just trying to get a idea of like maybe what that entails, or
well, I guess if you think about, you're like doing income verification, so you have to call the employer, or potentially getting a hold of an agency in regards to paying the rent, but you're getting that income verification. So you call to speak to the manager or the boss or whoever that is. So you call, and it could be a really quick phone call. It could take a couple days to call back. It's really going to depend on, what the circumstances are.
And depending on what property it is, some may have staff on hand to do that. And if it's just an individual owner, they might just be doing that themselves.
Yeah, the majority of our members this is something that they're going to be doing themselves as they're overseeing on the ground, working with their tenants and working with their properties. This is something that they're going to have to do themselves. The majority of our members do not have staff to do this for them.
So they're not actually paying anyone any additional funds then to
Some
do
people
it?
are. Again,
Okay.
it all depends. Just like in any industry, there's some of these property owners have one house. Other people have large apartment complexes. So it's all kind of depends on what that looks like. And that's another concern about ensuring that we aren't taking one stance for everything, because it is so diverse. It's a diverse community of who these property owners are and what kinds of properties they are. And they're not, in what parts of the state, suburban, urban, rural, that all makes a difference.
Sure, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate
Thank
your
you.
testimony. Thank you. So next up, we're going to have William Lawrence. Oh, sorry. Next up, we're going to have William Lawrence and Kyle Richard from Rent is Too Damn High, supporting the bill and wishing to speak.
Hi, William Lawrence, I'm a Lansing resident, and I'm the coalition coordinator for the Rent is Too Damn High. We had over 300. Hi, William Lawrence. I'm the coalition coordinator with the Rent is Too Damn High. We had over 350 renters, tenants here on Capitol, across the street last Tuesday. Y'all weren't here, but we were. From every corner around the state, we're up to 44 coalition partners, including strong presence in Detroit, Ann Arbor, Grand Rapids, and here in Lansing. And we've got over a dozen members of our coalition here today, and we intend to stay coming to this committee in a watchdog and accountability function throughout this fall. So I think I post myself actually as neutral on this bill. It seems like a rather soft approach to the issue. We would rather limit or ban these fees altogether, as Representative Andrews mentioned, has been done in other states. And there's also the matter of additional hidden fees for tenants who are on leases that can run into the hundreds or even thousands of dollars. We've heard stories of really exorbitant. So whether it's application fees or rental fees, hidden fees, the fact is that these fees are like whipped cream on the top of the profit cake for landlords, but they can be absolutely debilitating from the perspective of renters, especially if you're thinking about being housing insecure, on the brink of homelessness. You're trying to find a rental spot in the midst of this housing crisis. You might be putting in a dozen or more applications. And even if we're accepting the criminal background check, now we're talking about $30, $50 criminal background check times a dozen applications. That's $600 that people simply don't have. So, I mean, again, we could go even farther, but what's being proposed in this bill seems remarkably modest when you think about it from the standpoint of housing insecure, rent-burdened renter. I've got to admit, hearing some of the questions from this side of the room and Ms. Farley's testimony have made me more supportive of this bill sitting here, because it's think about the landlords. Give me a break. Think about the renters. And you're going to hear us saying that throughout this fall when we're here before this committee, because someone has got to think about the renters, and we're always thinking about how to make conditions more profitable for developers and landlords. But who is thinking about the renters who are increasingly rent-burdened and going unhoused with their families in the midst of this housing crisis? So you're going to hear us saying that, and I think you're hearing it in your districts as well. Additionally, I just want to state our urgent desire to see the rest of the Renters' Bill of Rights come before this committee as soon as possible. I know a number of you are co-sponsoring a number of those bills, and as well as the bill to lift the ban on rent control. Those are all things we're very eager to see come before this committee, and want to encourage the committee to meet as scheduled through the session. It's a short session. There's a lot to get done. And we know we've already missed one scheduled hearing that was scheduled for 1 week ago today. We really want to be here every week along with you all to get some urgent business done throughout this session. Thank you.
Thanks. Was Kyle Richard available to come up? Okay, Kyle from Rent is Too Damn High, wishing to speak in supporting the bill.
Yeah, hello, Kyle Richard. I'm going to keep it very brief. I second everything that Will just said. Housing is a human right. Housing is a human need. Application fees are a barrier to access. It's that simple. Thank you.
Rep. Fink, you can go ahead.
Yeah, and I guess my question is for Mr. Lawrence, really, because he's the one who kind of addressed the topic. But when we're talking about renters, look, I'm sure that your answer is going to be that landlords are robber barons who are making too much money. But if we control for that, because we have to at least imagine that there's some kind of economic reality here. All right, so if we were to eliminate all the robber baronness, all right, you agree that if these costs are going to be, if the landlord is going to reach whatever incentive level they have to keep being landlords,
Yeah.
then either the renters or the applicants are going to pay for whatever the costs are. And so when you say, like, who cares about the renters? I mean, one of my premises here is that we run the risk of forcing existing tenants to pay for applicants, let's say even an applicant who knows that he or she is not really going to be a good candidate. All right, so what about that problem? I mean, you're essentially asking current tenants to subsidize new applicants.
Well, this is the bind, right? Is that the only way to care about renters, apparently, is to care even more about landlords and developers, which is why we believe we need a public option on rental housing,
All right,
which
so
we
you're gonna
call a
answer my
social
question
housing
about
program.
this, because what we're dealing with here is either the renters or the applicants are going to pay these costs.
The fees are an exorbitant burden. As we said, if you're paying $50 criminal background check times a dozen or more applications, that's hundreds of dollars that very, very poor people do not have. And that means they end up on the street. So one way or another, we have to address that situation, and this seems like a pragmatic step in that direction.
All right.
Representative Cerniglu.
Thank you. And I'm not even really sure who this question is for, but just hearing this about like the criminal background check, if you're applying to 10 different places and you're getting the same criminal background check, I mean, I don't know, like, who could even answer this question, but like, if there's some way to like have some uniform check so that someone could use it in 10 different places. I don't know if there's some central database for landlords or something along that lines, because that just, I mean, it really seems wasteful to have the same check done 10 times over and have someone pay for it, be it the landlord or the applicant, that someone has to pay for that same check. And, you know, this is not an area of expertise for me, so I just don't know the answer to that question, but
Sure.
that
Yep.
just seems like a real concern.
Yep, thank you for that. And I think Rep. Andrews, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah. So we were actually trying to kind of get at that by requiring that the landlord provide the background check to the tenant, in part so they can see why they were rejected, which I think is important for them to see, but also with the idea that maybe we could create something where once they've got that background check, that it could be good for a duration of time, and maybe both limit the administrative cost on the landlords, but also the cost for the tenants applying to multiple locations. I mean, how many people are going to impact their background check negatively in like 30 days or something like that, right? So we were trying to kind of get at that, but I appreciate what you're saying, because it's a good, it makes sense, I think.
Thank you. And our last speaker today is going to be Kelsey Brienne from For Our Future, wishing to speak. It doesn't say supporting or opposed, but you're welcome to come up and talk.
That's better. Hi, my name is Kelsey Brienne. I'm with For Our Future Michigan, along with the Rennes UNM High Coalition. A couple things. Unintended consequences was mentioned, and I really feel like the intended consequence is happening for renters. The fact that we have these exorbitant fees becomes a barrier that just increases class difference, like a separation. And it's very clear that, and I don't want to say all landlords are bad. That's like an absolute statement. Absolutes generally are not a good idea, right? But if you are separating those things out, it makes it a major barrier for, I've noticed in doing this work that the focus has been on, okay, it's the American dream to own a home. That's not going to happen for everyone. So it's important that the tenants have those rights when they do apply. And so I do, along with Will, support this bill, but I feel like it's not enough. I feel like the idea of the background checks being a universal thing, game changer, that would be amazing. And also seeing why people, why they are denied, like this is the reason why, a lot of tenants, if they're going to see a Matthew or a Isha, they're going to, generally check one that be more involving racism and all of that. So I think that the clarity in that, I as well am hoping to see the full Tenants Bill of Rights passed. And yeah, I'm glad that we're looking at this session, or I'm glad that we're looking at this issue with several hearings. We'll be here this entire fall as well. And I hope to engage with you both as a group and individually. Thank you so much.
Thanks for coming up. Any members have any final questions or comments? Okay. Well, I have a few cards to read in. Todd Tennis from Center for Civil Justice, not wishing to speak and supporting the bill. Jim Shafsma from Michigan Poverty Law Program, not wishing to speak, supporting the bill. Rachel Richards from Michigan League for Public Policy, not wishing to speak, supports the bill. Lisa Chapman from Michigan Coalition Against Homelessness, not wishing to speak, supports the bill. Tim Langholtz, not wishing to speak, opposes the bill, from NFIB. John Lindley from Michigan Manufactured Housing Association, not wishing to speak, opposes the bill. Forrest Wall from Apartment Association of Michigan, not wishing to speak, opposes the bill. Jim Kirsch from Property Management Association of Michigan, not wishing to speak, opposes the bill. Rebecca Berkey from Michigan Realtors, not wishing to speak, opposes the bill. We need a motion to excuse absent members. Representative Grant makes the motion. There being no objection, the motion prevails by unanimous consent. And there being no more business before the committee will stand adjourned.